Nira Yuval Davis is Professor Emerita and Honorary Director of the Research Centre on Migration, Refugees and Belonging at the University of East London. She's active against racism and sexism in Israel and other settler and colonial societies, as well as in the UK. And Nira is also a member of the education group of Jewish Voice for Labour. So I'm very pleased to be welcoming a colleague.
Thank you very much. I have only this one slide because there's so much to say and so little time, and I'm grateful to Eddie that brought up some of the substantial issues that relate to the most recent bill. The name of the recent bill, I think, is very important because it's for the first time immigration legislation and nationality legislation are united together in the same bill officially, although these, of course, have been throughout the 20th and 21st century, at least, of British history. Theresa May invented the term hostile environment when she was interviewed in 2012. But of course, hostile environment towards migrant and immigration have existed a long time, formally since 1905 in an immigration legislation that was primarily addressed to poor Jewish migrants from Eastern Europe. I think we have three major nationality legislation that we need to look as an historical frame of in order to understand what is going on. We have the 1948 legislation in which Britain wanted to show that the British Empire covers the whole planet, and therefore it was a very inclusive legislation that basically, I think it almost unintentionally allowed all British subjects from the British Empire to come and settle in the UK, although, of course, they never intended it to be so. And Enoch Powell, who invited the people from Windrush to come and others to help the British state after post-World War, of course, also spoke the famous Rivers of Blood speech, if they actually will stay here. Then we had the 1981 Act, in which Britain rejected its imperial past and turned to become part of Europe. It was the first time in which British women get the same rights to transfer British citizenship to British men, but it is also the first time in which babies who are born on UK soil are not necessarily have the right to be British citizens. And now we have the present Nationality and Borders Bill, which is a post-Brexit bill, in which Britain go back to its glorious empire and reject the EU. So this is the most racialized, exclusive construction of who is the national we that has happened in British history, and therefore it becomes even harsher, more racialized and more exclusionary, although supposedly it's supposed to provide much more egalitarian treatment of migrants than before in all the migration history. In addition to the development over the years in which in addition to the Nationality Act, there have been a lot of migration acts that put more and more limitations of people to be able to legally immigrate to Britain. We also have a much more general crisis as a result of global neoliberalism crisis, which became very clear after the 2008 banking crisis, which some of us call the double crisis of governability and governmentality, in which governments stop more and more to present the interest of the citizen, and the citizen as in response became more and more distant and uninterested in politics, and of course trusting in governments. As a result of that, we have a double process that reinforce each other. We have on the one hand a bottom-up process, which we call the rise of the extreme Nativist right, which are trying to become more and more exclusionary to determine who is entitled for the shrinking collective resources of the state, with the privatization of the state under neoliberalism and so forth. And then we have the top-down process, which some of us are calling everyday bordering, that the government are trying to prove that actually they do have control of state and society. They do, they can protect the citizen. And we see the growing securitization of borders, and also we see the rise of everyday bordering as what we call the main technology of control of any kind of diversity and discourses of diversity, unlike multiculturalism, which was a hegemony way in which governments dealt with such a diversity in previous years. I don't have time to go into details about it. Hopefully, it will come in the discussion. However, what as a result of this rise of everyday bordering, we see the gradual phasing out of civil entitlements. This is not just because of every bordering, but of course also of neoliberalism, because the welfare state and become emptier and emptier with the years. But in relation to migrants,
2 minutes, please, Nira.
Okay, we see that people, migrants, lose the certainty that once they run the obstacle course that become more and more difficult, that actually at the end they will be able to settle and become and live here and become British citizen. Those who are already British citizens, refugees, that once was supposed to be the whole of one's life, is now at most very often just for very limited amount of years, or until their country of origin is so-called safe. But even people who are citizens and were born here and their parents are citizens, as we saw with the case of Shamina Begum, but also others, their citizenship is not secure. And Mike Cushman, who is chairing you, have written a very powerful piece which showed that all British Jews in principle are not safe of keeping their citizenship, because Israel has the law of return, which would offer them supposedly alternative citizenship. And at the same time, we see new citizenship duties emerging, in which people as employers, as landlords, as doctors, as bankers, as driving teachers and so on, and as well as in education, become unpaid, untrained border guards. And if they more than once are failing to identify so-called criminals who are fraudulent papers who are coming to work for them or live for them, they become criminal themselves and can even end up in prison. So what we see is that it doesn't, this process of hostile environment and everyday bordering doesn't only affect the migrants Although, of course, more and more what we call the gray zone, in which people are stuck on borders before crossing, after crossing, very often for the rest of their lives. And the conditions that Eddie just described are probably the best of this condition, and very often are allowed to die, as we know. But it also affects the society as a whole. It divides society. It's often divide families when the employer is the employer of a family relative who came as a...
Nira, can I ask you to wind down now?
Yes. So what we see is that these exclusionary processes are intensified, but they are also very racialized. But we need to look at them in an intersectional way, because at the same time that they are racialized and exclusionary, people with money continue not to be able to move freely, but also to buy citizenships. Thank you.